should be pretty obvious the inspiration behind why I wanted to talk about items today. But for those of you guys that are out of the loop, there is a famous YouTuber by the name of Mr. Who's the Boss. They created a video claiming that Pokemon Unite and other mobile games are a scam. Their evidence behind the scam was as follows. Held items provide a significant advantage when determining the outcome of a game. And as a new player, you're able to significantly increase that advantage by spending money. Therefore, the game is pay to win. And the reason it's a scam is because in his experience, after spending money, he was not able to gain a significant advantage. So if to you that sounds like a ridiculous argument, it's because it is, right? It's like saying, going to the gym is scam. You have to spend so much money just to get buff. And then when I went to the gym, I didn't get buff. So gyms are a scam. And it's like, okay, I guess, like in your life experience, you might have come to those conclusions. But if we want to take a look at, what the average player is able to achieve, or not even the average player, what any person has the opportunity to achieve, there's a lot more than that. And I think a lot of things were left out. So one, I wanted to address some of that. But two, also, I feel like it's a good time for us to talk about held items. We did have a previous episode on Inder University discussing items, going through how EXP share works, how different held items interact with one another, and basically what they do. So if you don't understand how some of the items work, I would recommend you watch that video first before completing today's lesson. And if you're brand new to the game, you really don't know what's going on, I'll help walk you through, but I really recommend that video first. There's a lot to be learned from there. Think of this as a follow-up to that. So what are we going to be talking about today? What are the best items I think that you should level to 30, or level in general? Categorizing items, we're going to put them into an attack category, special attack, defensive, utility, and should you run stacking items around? And I think that's a pretty big question that players often try to answer for themselves, like, should I run attack weight or not? And which Pokemon should I run on? So try to give you a better understanding of that. And then final, how do I make my own build? Think new Pokemon are coming out, and this video might not be able to cover that, or you might just be curious on how to develop builds on your own. I'm going to give you the tools and resources for that. Now, ultimately, I would say if you're brand new and a lot of this is still very foreign to you, or you play the game on and off, stick to, there's nothing wrong in looking at your favorite creator and just copying their build item for item. You don't need to understand how the items work to use them. But if you're looking to take your game to the next level, or you're just curious, you like the sound of my voice, and you just want to chill and hear me talk about some nerdy stuff, this video is going to be good for you. Before I get started really quick, I want to acknowledge some of the resources, some of the help that I get putting together these presentations and getting the knowledge that I do. So obviously UniteDB, a lot of the assets I get, a lot of the learning that I personally have comes from UniteDB, as well as the math cord, as well as, Palspoo, my girlfriend, who helps put together a lot of the art and make these presentations presentable. Also going to give a huge shout out to myself for cropping Mr. Who's the Boss for every single slide. So enjoy. And a new slide I wanted to add, just to showcase some of the art that was made for this series after, I've done a couple of these episodes. I really appreciate the support, and I love seeing the cute art that you guys make. So Beebs sent this on Twitter several weeks ago. I was a really big fan of it. I wanted to include it in Inder University. And my girlfriend Samantha, she's made a lot of emotes that are follower only in the channel. So some cool art. So check that out. And if any of you guys make anything or want to bring anything to my attention, adding me on Twitter is the easiest way to do that. But cool, let's get started. What should I get to level 30? What should I spend my money on so I don't scam myself? Put together a bit of a list for you. I want you to look at this list. People that are more familiar with the game, I know you're probably going to be enraging, looking at an item, being like, that should be here, this should be there. But let's talk first, okay? What is the value of leveling up your items in the first place? And for this, I want to direct your attention to UniteDB first. Let's understand on a basic level how items work again. So you buy an item, it's level 0 or level 1. Each item provides a passive stat bonus, and let's call it an active passive, or just a passive that helps achieve a certain outcome in the game. So remember, it has a stat bonus and an active bonus, right? It's not something you activate, but let's call it an active bonus. The stat bonus of the item scales in a linear fashion every single level. So level 1, muscle band gives attack and attack speed. Every other level, one of the stats will increase. Half of an attack speed, a full attack. Another half attack speed, another full attack. Another half attack speed, etc., 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 all the way up to level 30. Now, if you notice on the bottom, this is where you'll see the active bonus of the item. Now, muscle band deals additional damage with basic attacks by either 1%, and you'll notice that that increase doesn't increase until level 10. Then it goes up to 2%, and then finally at level 20, it'll go up to 3%. Every single item in the game operates this way. The passive, the stat bonus of the item scales linearly from 1 to 30, and the active component of the item scales at level 1 or level 0, 10, and 20. So you'll see a lot of content creators or a lot of players choose to have some of their items at level 20, some at 30, and then maybe sometimes in between. Some of the items, and I want to direct your attention here to the two most important items that you would want to get to level 30 are muscle band and attack speed, and scope blend, sorry. Muscle band, the reason is that though you do max out on this amazing active portion of muscle band purely at level 20, due to the simple nature on how attack speed works, and this is exclusive to muscle band as there are no other attack speed items. You can see, we can talk about attack speed emblems all we want, but from an item perspective, this is the only item in the game that provides attack speed. And because of how attack speed works, you need to hit certain thresholds of attack speed to actually see any change at all in attack speed. So many Pokemon require this to be level 30. At some level intervals, it'll need to be at least 24, 27, 28, etc. So to be safe, to make sure this item does its intended purpose, this item, no matter what type of characters you elect to play in Pokemon Unite, is so universally good and so important to get to 30 that I would get this to 30. Now, if we think back to Mr. Who's the Boss in the video that he made, one of the complaints was that it takes so much money to get an item from 20 to 30. You have to buy item enhancers. Item enhancers cost gems. Gems lure you in. Once you're lured in, you're scammed. Then you're going to lose your house. You're going to get addicted to the game, etc., etc. What they failed to mention in their video was that once you hit player level 15, which can be accomplished depending on how hard you want to grind, anywhere from your first day to your first couple days, you get 3 free level 30 item enhancers, or the ability to level up your items from 0 to 30 automatically. And if you already had leveled up your item to a certain amount, you get that much back in item enhancers so you don't accidentally scam yourself. So that means one of your item enhancers, I would snap use it on muscle band. Now we can talk about another one, scope lens, which has similar important properties like muscle band, but it is not as universal in terms of its use case. So again, just a refresher real quick. Items have a stat bonus, which increases on a linear basis every single level. So in the case of scope lens, it's critical hit rate and critical hit damage. Very, very important stats that aren't very heavily available for Pokemon. And then very, very importantly as well, once you get it to 20, you max out on the active component, where you deal an additional 75% of your attack stat when you proc a crit. The reason why this item is so important to get past 20, despite you maxing out on the bottom effect here, is that there is literally no other way in the game to increase your critical hit damage. And you get the opportunity to increase that by 4%, which is just pure damage every time you're critting. And for Pokemon that rely on crits and basic attacks critting, this is important, as well as you get an additional 2% in your critical hit rate. So if you're playing Pokemon that rely on this item, and the Pokemon that traditionally rely on these types of items are going to be physical attackers. They don't necessarily have to be melee or ranged, but physical attackers usually in the attacker and all-rounder and speedster spots. Any Pokemon that relies on critting with their basics will excel with Scope Lens, some more than others, and we've talked about this in the past. For example, Azumarill, while you don't care about increasing their critical hit rate, their crit rate damage, and that Scope Lens proc synergizes very well with their 100% crit rate. Charizard, a Pokemon that has the opportunity to proc that Scope Lens very often, very strong. Pokemon like Cinder and Greninja, who rely on using their basic attacks as their form of dealing damage, as well as Duraludon, Dragonite, these Pokemon all excel with Scope Lens. And then speedsters that, rely on landing crits, like Absol, for example. All these Pokemon, wonderful with Scope Lens. Some maybe not as good. That might be your more tanky kind of all-rounders, and we can talk about that later as well. But these two items give you the most benefit once you get to level 30. Now, as for the rest of the items, truthfully, they're pretty much going to be rated in your use and how much you use them. There's definitely some merit in looking to level up the items that give flat stats such as HP, because the HP stat is generally more valuable than others. But this is assuming that you're the player that plays literally every single character equally, and you give it as much love as any other character in the game. Most people, the way that they play the game, and even myself, I like to be flexible, but a lot of people, they have kind of archetypes of characters that they like. Some people are big fans of playing the range damage dealers like Cinder and Greninja. Some are more fans of like bulkier characters like Serena, or like semi-bulky characters like Serena and Lucario. Some are much more fans of like really tanky Pokemon like Greedent and Tree and Mamoswine, right? So depending on your use case, it's gonna depend with whichever items you use more often are gonna be more beneficial for you to get past level 20. So I rated these more so from how often I would see the average player look to use these. And that's how I rated them. Now, there's some exceptions to this. For example, Focus Band is an item that I have rated quite highly, though the benefit from 20 to 30 is not that significant compared to some other items. The main part of this item is getting a healing component, which caps at 20. And from 20 to 30, you gain 10 of each defense, which is about 1.5% effective HP, roughly, for each of these damage types. It's not a whole lot, but the reason I have it rated so highly is that it's an item that you can use almost on any Pokemon in the game. So I would tend to recommend leveling your items past 20 or even 220 on items that are more flexible in where they can be used. For example, Floatstone, special attack specs, Energy Amp, like these are very strong items on very specific niches, as well as EXP Share. EXP Share, one of the best items in the game, but very few people are going to be looking to use this. Not a great use case in solo queue either. But attack weight, it's an attack-based item that you can run on any Pokemon that scales off of attack in the game. So while for a lot of Pokemon past level 20, this item might not have a lot of value, the simple fact that you can use it on almost half the squad is relevant, right? And if you don't believe me, you switch to physical attacker here, and I can't name any Pokemon with maybe the exception of Snorlax that would be horrible with this item. There's some cases like Cinderace and Greninja where it's tough to get the extra value from this item because how hard it is for them to stack it. There might be, a case for Pokemon like Tyranitar, who's also weak in the early game. Maybe Garchomp might benefit from more defensive stats. And maybe Snorlax is one that might not be good at all. But for the most part, a lot of people say, oh, look at the ratios if I'm going to use attack weight. To be honest, all the ratios are good for Pokemon that would leverage attack weight. Even for a Pokemon like Cinderace, just the simple fact that your basic attack has a 100% ratio and your boosted has a 130 ratio, attack weight alone is going to be good. You crits double your damage. You have guaranteed crits in the form of Blaze Kick. It's just always, attack weight's always going to be a good item if you play attack-based characters. Special attack specs, it's not an exact parallel, not as universally good, but a lot of good options. Look at builds that are common among Pokemon you play, and then choose to level those up past 20. As a baseline though, I would look to get all the items in the first 3 quadrants to level 20, or first 3 lines here to 20. And then beyond that, you can look what to get to 30 for these second ones. The top 2, if you play these items, they should be level 30. Cool. So let's move on here. Let's categorize some of these items. Now, what do they look like in terms of how can I address my own builds? How do I want to play builds? How do I make builds, etc.? So let's look at some categories. Now, I made it very clear, if someone does end up screenshotting this, these are not tiered. I don't think that these attack-based items in the first tier are any better than the bottom ones. This is just the easiest way that I could showcase this. But cool. So we have our offensive attack-based items. These are items that increase your attack directly or synergize well with attackers, like physical-based attackers. Your special attack counterparts to these items. So we have attack weight, which stacks, special attack specs, which stacks on the other end, choice specs, which activates whenever you use a move, Razor Claw activates whenever you also use a move on your basics. This is on your actual move. So there are some parallels here. Muscle Band is a universal item that can be used across the board. You have your defensive items. So these items increase your HP or your defenses in some kind of way. And these utility items are also defensive items, but they offer some kind of utility that's beyond the top 3 here. That's relevant. And if you want to know how these items work, obviously the previous video I've done on held items is going to be your best bet there. But I wanted to talk a little bit about approaching builds and how to make kind of your own builds in Pokemon Unite. Truthfully, if you're lost and you don't know what you should play on a particular Pokemon, you could either type ! followed by the Pokemon in my Twitch chat. I'm sure some of your other creators have similar formats to that. And also you can just go on UniteDB, pick a Pokemon, just pick Greninja, go to builds, and then here you can get a pretty reasonable build on, a pretty well-informed build. Now, I might personally have some disagreements with some of these builds, but they're not major enough differences that are gonna make or break your game. So for example, on Greninja, you'll see like Muscle Band and Scope Lens. There's this third item that has an alternative kind of move set to it, or alternative set to it. We'll go to Cinderace, very similar kind of idea. Muscle, Scope, and then a third item. And if we go back here, that's kind of how you want to approach making your own builds. For Pokemon that are damage dealers, try to use 2 offensive items, and then look to see if you require a defensive item, or if you can get away with using another offensive item. In general, for attack-based Pokemon, Muscle Band is going to be their best offensive item. And Scope Lens, if they rely on basic attacks at all, or if they have any kind of crit in their kit, Scope Lens is going to be an amazing follow-up to that. And then attack weight, if you can afford to stack it, will be the most, will be the best damage item you can go for. If you're not able to stack, or you're just afraid to stack, or you're jungling, or you don't want to, Razor Claw is a great option for the most damage output. Weakness is good if you're more tankier and you want to take advantage of your stats scaling off of you taking some damage. And Float Stone is an excellent attack item that also gives you some mobility as well. The point of what I'm trying to say here is once you've got muscle and scope for any attacking characters that attack frequently, any of the third offensive items are going to do, and then any defensive item will do as well. I would use this line here as choices of options you have for a defensive item, but generally it's going to be either Buddy Barrier or Focus Band for your attack-based characters. And the same is going to be held true for your special attack-based characters. You pick 2 offensive items. The best offensive items you can pick are probably going to be Wise Glasses and Choice Specs. If you can stack and you don't require a defensive item, you can go special attack specs. If you want more special attack and you don't want to stack, you can run Shell Bell for a slightly smaller attack gain and some cooldown reduction. And then you can couple, or if you need a defensive item, you throw in a defensive item on top of that. And then if you're running Pokemon that benefit from cooldown reduction, which you might see, Pokemon we talked about in the last episode that use green and black emblems, you might want to run 2 cooldown reduction items on those. So think like Delphox, for example, and I hope I can see, double cooldown reduction item, and then you can choose to run a defensive item, as you see down here, or an offensive item. I think, personally, I'll always side with the fact that Choice Specs is the superior offensive special attack item, whereas on the attack side, there's a couple different options that depend on the Pokemon. And then if you're looking at tanks, you want to look how to itemize for defensive tanks. We'll start, do you have the opportunity to use any utility items, i.e. Score Shield or EXP Share? In 5 stacks, I would recommend 1 to 2 EXP shares per team on the tanks or the supports. And then I usually like to just layer in more defensive opportunities. So Buddy Barrier gives a lot of HP, gives a shield to your teammate. Focus Band allows you to stay alive longer. You can look to experiment. You can add in an Eos cookie over one of those if you deem one of those to be not high in value and you're solo queuing. Assault Vest in metas where we see a lot of special attack-based characters. So when we had Mew, Mime, and Glaceon, I'd say that this was a premier tank item. Leftovers, I'd say it's almost there in terms of viability, but I'm always going to prefer both Buddy and Focus Band over Leftovers. And then if I'm going to pick a third item, it'll be utility or defensive again. Rocky Helmet's not listed here as in the item is far too situational, and the situations aren't that great to pick apart as well. But let's move on. That kind of characterizes how you categorize these items and kind of, how you make your own build. So think a new Pokemon comes out, right? What I'm going to want to do is I'm going to go to Unite DB, and let's take a new Pokemon that is coming out, right? Let's try to apply some of these properties that we just learned. I'm going to say Sableye, a Pokemon I'm personally very excited to play. It's been announced. We know it's coming in the month of October. I imagine this Pokemon, it's a supporter. It's melee. It's going to walk around the map. First things first, I know I'm not going to be able to get a lot of farm. So let's look to the utility tab of our items. Any good utility items? EXP Share. I'm stealth. It gives me movement speed while I walk around the map. It gives me some tank stat, as well as allows me to keep up on farm. So cool. Now, as a supporter, how can I provide some more help to my team? Depending on the Unite move cooldown, I might look to use Buddy Barrier to shield for my teammates, and it's flat HP for myself. Depending on Sableye's max HP, I might look to use Focus Band. I can continue to be annoying in the enemy team's base. If they do use a big cooldown like a Unite move on me, I might be able to escape with my Focus Band, which will provide more utility to my team. I might even look to an item like Floatstone. While it's not directly in the utility tab, it's an item that gives out of combat movement speed, which, to be honest, for Sableye could be very powerful. So these are the types of thought processes I'm going to be going into when I'm coming up with the build. But what you have to understand is there's no one right way to play Pokemon Unite. People's opinions on things change. What's strong in the game changes on, flavor of the month, patches, what other players are feeling, what feels annoying, what doesn't feel annoying, what's bugged, what's not bugged. So as long as you have the right kind of fundamentals, your builds are never going to be too bad, right? As long as you're not playing special attack-based items on an attack-based character, cough, cough, choice specs. If you're not leveraging something like Leftovers before you've exhausted better defensive opportunities, your builds are going to be fine. And if you stick to leveling items that you use frequently to 20 and items that require to be 30 to perfectly operate to 30, your builds are going to be fine. You'll be able to create new builds for new Pokemon. You won't need to spend any amount of money or an excess amount of money. And a free-to-play player should be fine. I imagine we're going to be seeing a lot of creators. I'm excited. I saw Spragos tweet it out. I think I saw Chris Heroes do this. And I imagine a lot of other creators are going to be doing this. Free-to-play to masters or winning a game at this elo with no items, with no emblems, a free-to-play version of the game. And I'm very confident that they're going to be able to do it because they're very capable players. But what I don't want the messaging to ever get mixed up by people like Mr. Who's the Boss is their argument is always going to be these are more capable players that are able to offset the skill difference because of the experience they have in the game. And for a new player, this is not going to work. And what I want to emphasize beyond all of that is that a brand new player who's never played a MOBA before, if they do at least a little bit of research, stand no disadvantage to a player who's played longer than them or spent more money than them. It's not that there's no significant advantage or an advantage that can be made up by skill. You can literally take the level 30 items, item enhancers that you get. You can buy Muscle Band, Buddy Barrier, Focus Band, use your 30 on Muscle and Buddy, get your Focus to 20, play that on any Pokemon on the game, and you're not at a disadvantage when you're first starting out in the game. Of course, if you load into a game with choice specs, leftovers, scope lens on Charizard, you're effectively using one item. And finally, the last thing that I want to end this off of with is that I don't blame Mr. Who's the Boss or anyone like him who's made a video like this. For sure, I think they're negligent in the research that they did, and they're careless in the way that they voice their opinions and with the platform that they have. But I think an equal share of blame, if not more, needs to go to the Pokemon Unite developers for not educating their own player base in their own game. It would not be difficult for them to have a small pop-up come up when you equip choice specs on the Charizard, and that said, careful, that's a special attack item, your Pokemon uses attack. It's not fair for returning or new Pokemon players to see Charizard and not think it's a special attack based Pokemon when it has moves like Flamethrower and Fire Blast, right? It's unfortunate that it is the way that it is, but we should drive for a change in our own game itself. So I know I'm speaking like preaching to the choir, like I'm preaching to an overall audience, because most of you guys know this kind of stuff. But you know, if there's change that we want to direct, I think that's where we'd want to direct the change. And obviously we want to address these situations when they come up, because while they made a very amazingly produced YouTube video, it addressed a community that could have accessed the game, and some of those people are going to be off put. So that is what upsets me. This was Inder University Held Items 201. If you have any questions, I'm going to look in the chat right now if you're live. Or if you're on YouTube, put them in the comments below and I'll try to clear anything up for you. Thank you, guys.